So we are live, by the way. The cameras are rolling, and so thank you all for being here. We will officially call the city to order and initiate this en banc meeting with our friends across the street. And I will turn it over to Chairman Unruh to officially call the county meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we're pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation for us to get together and talk about an important subject. But at this time, I'll call to order the special meeting of the Board of County Commissioners and ask our clerk to call the roll, please.
Commissioner Dennis?
Present.
Commissioner Ranza?
Present.
Commissioner Howell?
Present.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Present.
Chairman Unruh?
Present. Thank you, and we are now in session.
So now that you've officially done roll call, how do we know that some of you aren't imposters? I mean, we don't do this official roll call.
You have to take our word for it. You have to trust us.
Well, thank you very much. Obviously, our agenda is very small. We have one item of business, and that is to work out this agreement with our ambulance service that you all provide and provide very well for our community. I know that we've had a couple of council members that we've asked to try and work out a few issues, and so I'm really going to ask Councilmember Meissner and Councilmember Fry to kind of lead the discussion, because I've been out of town and I haven't heard and haven't had a chance to be briefed by them on where we're at with the issues that we're trying to work our way through. And we'll kind of open it up for anyone that wants to jump in there, Chairman. I don't know how you want to work our way through this. I know we have a new agreement, I think, that was forwarded to us this morning.
That's
and
correct.
We'll ask our council members to kind of work through any potential sticking points that they might have. And so Councilmember Fry, Councilmember Meissner will kind of look for you to provide us some direction as we work our way through this.
Okay, well, thank you, and appreciate everybody being here. You know, a little bit over a year ago, when we first had this renewal come before us, we were at this point and kind of trying to figure out where we were going to go with it. And Commissioner Dennis and I, along with great assistance from staff, did a thorough review of EMS operations, and totally impressed with the quality of care that EMS is providing to our community. No argument there. Since our last council meeting on June 20th, when the proposal came forward at the council meeting for agreement, a lot more discussion. It was tabled to allow for more negotiation, and myself, Councilmember Meissner, along with city staff and Commissioners Unruh and Dennis and their staff, have been meeting and trying to figure out some commonality to get through on this agreement. I still think there's just a couple of sticking points that I'm not comfortable with yet, and I don't know that we're going to be able to get there today. I know that staff has provided an extension of the current contract, a 30-day extension notification window, so that if we're not able to finalize it today, there is an option to extend that to allow for more time and negotiation. But at the root, what I feel is still a sticking point is those citizens that are having to wait over an hour for non-emergent transport is not addressed in this document. And that's really where it's come down to for me. Pete?
Let me back up just for a second. You mentioned this working committee. Commissioner Dennis, you also served on that committee. Was there any other county commissioners that served on that?
No, the last couple meetings that we had, Chairman Unruh also sat in on some of those. But to go back in time just a little bit, as Councilman Fry said, we started meeting several months ago. We had our first meeting over in the Ronald Reagan building, and at that time, my city and county staff really got a good overview of what the EMS is all about. Following that meeting, we had a meeting here in your building, and again, city and county staff met. We also had Dr. McMaster from the Medical Society of Sedgwick County, along with Dr. Gallagher, the Director of Medicine here in Sedgwick County and Wichita, involved in that meeting. Worked out some more details. Subsequent to that, we had a meeting over in our building, which the mayor and Councilman Meitzner attended. We worked out more details from that meeting, and then it was presented to you with an agreement that we thought was the final agreement. Your city manager then presented it to you on the meeting on June 13th, as I recall. And that's the one that it was tabled at. We thought we had an agreement, and if you look at what city manager presented to you, why the recommendation was to agree to it. After that was tabled, we had 2 breakfast meetings with Councilman Meitzner and Councilman Fry, and we talked about a number of other issues. Subsequent to that, numerous phone calls, numerous coordinations, and if you kept track of all of the different iterations, you'll have a file like I do. So you were presented actually a copy yesterday with what we thought was going to be the final discussions. I know that Councilwoman Miller talked with Chairman Unruh yesterday about putting some more teeth in it, and I know that the mayor mentioned that on June 13th. We modified the contract again that you have today. The only change that is in the contract that is presented before you today from the one that was yesterday was adding the teeth in the contract that says that if we can't meet 98% of the time over 2 quarters, that we will present a corrective action to you, which may entail hiring a third-party vendor or may entail us providing additional resources, but we'll provide you with a recommended action that we will take. We'll have the rest of that quarter and 1 more quarter to take those corrective actions. If at the end of that period of time we still can't meet it, you have the ability to terminate the contract at that time, and it's written in just those words that you can terminate it. So although the contract is currently written that it says that it is a 5-year contract, and the reason that we have that in there truly is because we have to do long-range planning. We have to decide on where to build new facilities, whether or not to build or purchase new equipment. And so we need to be able to do long-range planning for our CIP and for purchases and staffing. But if you look at the paragraph 6 with the termination requirements that we added to that this morning, it really is a year contract because we have two quarters that we may not meet something. We have 2 more quarters to do corrective action, and at the end of that time, you can terminate the contract. So I know that the concerns that have been expressed on having a 5-year contract, we tried to address those. It does say it's a 5-year contract, but in reality, it's a 1-year contract if we can't meet the requirements. I know Councilman Fry mentioned that we haven't addressed those that are over an hour. Well, again, I think that paragraph 6 that we added teeth to does address whether or not that we can meet the requirements of an hour. Today, we are at 98.45%, 98.45% of meeting the any kind of a non-emergency dispatch in 60 minutes or less. That's where we're at today. We're actually talking about 1.45% of the time on whether or not that we can meet those requirements. If we don't, we put teeth in there to make sure that those citizens are taken care of. And we're not talking about Wichita citizens. Every single one of those citizens in the city of Wichita are Sedgwick County citizens too. And we care very deeply about each and every one of those citizens. So we're not just trying to make sure that we satisfy Wichita. This is truly a Sedgwick County partnership agreement that we're looking for. But I do appreciate you letting me make a couple statements.
Sure, not a problem at all. We'll call on Councilmember Meitzner, and then we'll kind of open it up to the entire group.
Well, yeah, Commissioner Dennis gave us the historic meeting perspective, which we did, and we have worked out a lot of concerns, and I think the concern that I don't know I mean, we know the number now, but this number of citizens in the city that we care for, because we actually are signing off any rights to do anything and allowing an exclusivity to the EMS of Sedgwick County to provide service, as Commissioner Dennis said, to Wichita and to all of Sedgwick County. But it's the issue about if that 1 or 2% that have to wait over an hour it may only be a few, it may be a lot someday, and so that is one that we just thought should have some citizens should have some, or we should have an option for that part. I don't think that our council in whole is we're okay with. We understand long-term planning. I mean, that's what we do. We all do that. So the reason we've had 1 year was not to regurgitate last year, but it was last year at this time that it was kind of a different time, and we didn't have near the data we have now and the information. So it was extended a year at that time, and I think all the efforts is to try to work something out. The other, basically that's pretty much it. So
let me just say from my perspective, I'm almost looking at this like it's two separate agreements, even though it's not. One is the transportation for operating emergency services, which we have no intent to open it up at this point in time. And we could, I mean, if there's, just want to make sure there's no confusion on this. When we talk about, the 98%, I mean, we could almost draw up language if it made you feel comfortable for long-range planning, that the emergency side of this you can have, for a 10-year contract, let's just say. We're not concerned with that. You guys provide great emergency service. And understanding what Councilmember Fry opened up with some of his comments, I think there's certainly some teeth into what you're saying, but yet the contract itself still grants exclusivity right up front, which means there's obviously no desire to respond using outside services. I mean, is it that big of a deal just to alter that one paragraph where it grants the opportunity if so needed? You're still managing it. I don't understand the exclusivity clause in there. So paragraph 5, during any and all terms of this agreement, the city agrees that the county will have the sole and exclusive right to operate emergency and non-emergency medical ambulance services. The only time that might be preempted is the new clause that you put in there saying if you can't meet basically over a year period, 6 months, and then a 6-month corrective action period, so a 1-year period, you can't meet the 98%, then you may open it up. Why not go ahead and say that in paragraph 5? Because Otherwise, you kind of contradict the teeth in the term in paragraph 5.
Mr. Mayor, the way that we intend this to operate, and I think the language says that if we're non-performing for 2 consecutive quarters, we have to then be performing within the next 2, or you can terminate the contract.
So again, yeah.
And part of our remedial action can be using a third-party vendor, a private vendor, or we can strengthen our own resources. But failure to comply, the 98% threshold is, I mean, we only get a pass, if that's the right word, for the first 2 quarters. After that, we have to comply. If we haven't, you can break the contract.
So
But
again,
that next 2 months,
right.
we can use a third-party vendor.
So again, let me say, our intent isn't to break the contract. Our intent isn't to sever this agreement. Our intent is to have you provide the services for emergency and non-emergent transportation. So rather than put in the intent as just to sever the agreement, I would rather see more proactive approach to ensuring that and we're not saying you have to. So in paragraph 5, just, I mean, you again control it.
Right.
What is the harm with just saying that there may be a private operator, that you may use the resources of a third-party operator and not just simply say you have exclusive rights?
Well, in paragraph 6, Mr. Mayor, it says that one of our options is to enhance our own service or supplement with the use of a third-party private emergency medical ambulance. So that's in there, and we would certainly explore that if we were in non-compliance. Now, and I think the language suggested by Councilman Fry was that we could do either one, just get the job done.
Mr. Mayor, one point on the exclusivity. We need the option that by being exclusive, that we can contract ourselves. If we don't have an exclusive contract, you could go out and subcontract with someone. This gives, the exclusivity gives us the ability that we can manage the EMS contract, the EMS process, by going out and doing subcontracting, and that's why we wrote paragraph 6 the way we did, is so that we can have the option to go out and do subcontracting. So if we don't have exclusivity, anyone could go out and contract.
So you're saying the exclusivity only is for basically the management of the system, not owning and operating the vehicles?
Right. We're not saying that other people can't own and operate vehicles. We need exclusivity so that we can
To manage
do
the
what's
system.
best to manage the EMS.
Contract to manage the system. Okay. I understand that better.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Well, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a point while we're talking about our response times, and I mentioned this to Councilwoman Miller yesterday, that from January 1st, 2017 through June 9th, 2017, instead of talking about percentages, the actual number of cases where we did not pick up within an hour in the city of Wichita, in those cases where we don't already have a contract, was 16 in just over 5 months. And so rather than talking about 1 or 1.5% that we're not, this is a specific number that we had this year. I don't want to discount the importance of picking those up. And I don't have the number in my mind. Did we pick them up in an hour and 15 or an hour and 30? But for a system as large as ours that provides the services, that number of people is where we fell outside the 1 hour. I guess I'm just saying that's really pretty good performance. And as Commissioner Dennis reminded me, all of those people where they were over an hour are folks who are in the hospital waiting for transfer back to either home or nursing facility of some kind. And complicating factor is a lot of those calls are made right near the end of the shift because the shift wants to get them all taken care of. And so that complicates our pickup. We got 3 or 4 at one time. But that's something we have to deal with. But I guess my point is no one was in any sort of stress, weren't in any danger, wasn't emergent, and they were under care.
Is it my understanding that the hospitals now have a private number to call?
I don't know. Can we
I
ask
asked
our
that
staff to
question.
respond?
I asked that question of Scott Hadley, head of our EMS, and he said they call 911 and dispatch out of 911. Is that not true?
Scott had
Still-
EMS. For Sedgwick County, the hospitals call 911 and schedule that transport, that non-emergent transport. The physician's office, it all goes through our 911 dispatcher.
Okay, so there's not a separate number right now for hospitals to call, like Wesley or?
No, if there's a transport required from Wesley to outside Sedgwick County, for example, going to Salina, then they would call a different number because we don't provide that service.
Outside the area.
Correct.
And this contract that we're considering shows that we can use in Section 5D, that we can use private providers if we're not able to perform.
So I guess my question is right now, if a citizen is sitting in the hospital and they want to get home, do they have the option to call 911 themselves and ask for a private transport right now?
Not now. I don't
Or
know.
does Sedgwick County have to manage that for the citizen?
I think at this point, Sedgwick County has exclusive right for those transports from hospitals.
Okay.
And we're under contract. And as a point of information, that time period there is 1.5 hours. For 90% of the pickups in 1.5 hours.
So for that 2%, honestly, I think 98% is, if you're hitting 98%, it's an absolutely amazing goal. Honestly, I think it's probably a hefty goal to manage long term. But let's just talk about the 2%. If we have the opportunity within that 2% to make sure that 100% of the people are satisfied by just allowing citizens that fall within that 2% to call a private transport. We could fix all the problems right now. They can call 911 just like everybody else does and just tell 911, instead of calling EMS, well, I don't even know what the name of the private transport companies are, but it's non-emergency. And I think if citizens had a choice, instead of them making the choice, the government, us, Wichita, Sedgwick County, making a choice for them, I really believe they can make their own choice on whether or not who they go with for non-emergency service. I think it could fix everything.
Commissioner O'Donnell has a comment.
We have exclusivity right now with Wesley, the HCA hospital here in town, and our EMS is in talks with Ascension Health right now about performing that exclusively with the Via Christi properties. If that happens, those 16 individuals that waited over the allotted time, we would be at 100%. And if there's exclusivity, there's no one else that would have been affected negatively by that. Just for reference.
Okay.
They were all hospital transports. Everybody in their home was met in that period of time.
I guess my concern is that just on a quality of life, even if it's one person, if they get a chance to make a phone call and say, I'm going to be here an hour, instead of calling Uber, I'm going to call Lyft, or instead of calling a taxi company, it's non-emergency transport. And I think we have an opportunity here to give citizens some choice and improve their quality of life at the same time. It's probably what I'm suggesting would take all of this off the rails, I guess, but everything that's been negotiated. But it seems like a very simple fix. It really does.
Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Clendenin, I'll weigh in on this because this is where we were a year ago. That is going to free market system for all non-emergent transfer.
Well, I'm
And-
just
and-
suggesting the people in the 2%, not all of it. I'm just suggesting that if someone's told you're gonna have to wait over an hour, you do have the option
Okay.
to,
They don't know that.
911's already talking to them, 911 can tell them.
Okay, I wanted to make sure, I guess I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
I was like, any time they wanted to.
I'm just talking about this 2% of people, that are being told you're gonna have to wait an hour, hour and a half, that they, at that point, could have the option.
Well, and I had suggested a similar scenario where Sedgwick County just goes ahead right now at the beginning of the contract, calls up they issue an RFP and contract with a third-party provider right away. So that on January 10th of next year, if we can't pick somebody up in an hour and they already have somebody set up that could come get that person in less than an hour. And apparently there was some concern about going through all that effort for the 16 people is what I heard, 16 times roughly to 32 to 50 people a year. I guess ultimately the county has to decide, are you okay with telling your taxpayers, 50 or 60 of you a year are going to have to wait longer than an hour, and we're not willing to go through an RFP process to have a standby third party to do that. I think we all wish they had that option. But I think what I've heard is that you guys feel like that's too much trouble to go through for just 30 to 50 people a year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the concern is twofold. First, it's if someone is going to call and get the non-emergent care, other factors can happen. There can be a terrible car accident, there could be a fire, there could be extenuating circumstances that is more pressing when you have someone's life on the line. Our system at EMS, what this does is it disrupts it. So we're not going to look at raising taxes to subsidize whatever loss we're going to have by not having those 16 or 50 people a year, but we'll have shift changes, other things. But I think if we tell the people in the city of Wichita and in Sedgwick County that this might mean that instead of us getting to their home in 5 minutes if you're having a heart attack or if your loved one's in cardiac arrest, it'll take 7 minutes or 8 minutes. I think people would much rather be in a safe environment for a few minutes longer, like a hospital in these circumstances, than knowing it's going to take us longer to respond to actual emergent calls. There's pretty high favorability with the general public with EMS. People seem to be pretty happy with it. I think that disrupting that could have negative consequences and could affect our response times, and that should concern anybody and everybody.
That's a big
I'm not saying that you would go take the non-emergency person first. You would just call
Right.
XYZ Transport, which you had, and dispatch that, and your ambulances still go to the emergency service.
And I understand that, but it does disrupt the funding that we would have in EMS, and that funding would have to be, that money would have to be found somewhere else, and that's what I'm saying. It could be shift changes, it could be reduction in staff. There are ways that we're going to have to find money for that, and that could have the effect of longer response times for emergent care, because the way we have it with the exclusivity is that it's a system that's operating all together in a pretty nice package, and I think Scott Hadley and the folks at EMS do a very good job of making both of those sides balance so that we have a great EMS team here in Sedgwick County, and that response times are pretty good. There's always perfection, and none of us are perfect in any job we do, but over 98% is pretty remarkable for any government entity. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Dennis, did you want? Well, I think Commissioner Ranzo hadn't spoken and he wants to talk.
Yeah, I'll preface this by saying that you may find this surprising, but I find myself in minority with my commissioners today. I have a couple issues with this particular contract. The first one is item 3, accreditation. Right now, we are accredited, but it's not mandated by the current agreement. I would ask the city to allow us to have the flexibility to determine that. There's a cost-benefit analysis that I think we have to continually do, so that's an issue. And then with the major sticking point of paragraph 6, I'm open to allowing private sector entities to provide non-emergent transports, whether it be 45 minutes, an hour, whatever. I think we need to give honest consideration to this because it is about customer service. And I'll have to disagree with my fellow commissioner. This is not going to affect, I mean, the amount of money we're talking about, there's no reason why this should affect our emergent response. Okay, that's just, I don't believe that's accurate. Because having someone else to assist us with non-emergent actually frees us up. And the amount of funding that we might lose, we have room for efficiencies within the EMS department, I can assure you. So I think I'd be open to accommodating the city's request as far as some non-emergent private sector options there. I think it would be a win-win for everybody. I just don't think the sky's going to fall.
So I'm just trying to do the math here. I think when we had our June, whatever it was, 13th meeting, we were showing a slide that said on average ambulance service collects $2,500 a ride. That's the number that was thrown out on that PowerPoint. I don't know why you chose 2,500. I think it was an average of collections. So you took all of the rides and divided them. But anyways, they showed us $2,500 going up a memory. I think it was $4,000 is what is charged, but I don't know why they used the $2,500 figure.
I think it's more like 300.
Or five, yeah,
Yeah,
right,
500, yeah.
right. 500, I'm sorry. So we're not talking about a lot of money then. So if you just take $500 times 50, what is that?
25,000.
So $25,000 would impact your services?
I think the question is, do you think there's any private service company that would want to gear up for that level of business?
I think there's some today that are operating in the city for rides outside of Sedgwick County that are saying they would be staffed and willing to take some of that responsibility.
Well, I understand that that's the request, but Mr. Mayor, if we had a private company, and we will look for one, we'll try to put out an RFP and find them. I mean, that's part of what we're agreeing to do. But I think that this current company that's working right now, which we don't know anything about,
I don't either.
nobody's come to us and said, here's what we got, let us in the door, let us do some of this, let us provide. We have no idea if they have one ambulance or they had 10 ambulances. But if they've got a couple of ambulances and one of them's in Reno County and one of them's in Saline County, they cannot respond to a non-emergent call within an hour. And so if we want to choose him, we'd have to check all that out first. How much investment do you have? Are you going to be able to respond to our call? Do you have the crew members? And right now, they may have, but I suspect they do not have the resources. And would they be willing to gear up for 50 rides a year or whatever the number is? I think that's part of my question. And I kind of interrupted Commissioner Dennis. I think he wanted to make a comment. Are you still up?
Well, actually, you said a lot of the things that I was getting ready to say, is that no one has come to talk to me, and I would have thought, since we're the ones that have the exclusive contract right now, they'd have been talking to us. So right now, I can't tell you, I don't know what assets or resources they have. I don't know what their non-emergent response times are. I don't know what training that they have, what kind of licenses that they have. Are they EMT, paramedic, ALS capable? I have no idea on that. Do they require payment up front when they show up at the hospital? Are they going to want money immediately? And some of them do. Are they credentialed through our medical director, as every other EMT paramedic in Sedgwick County is? How long have they been in business in Wichita? How many times have they been unable to meet the need or had to reschedule the transfer? What are their insurance and bonding requirements? Because if we do subcontract to them, are we going to be liable if they get sued? That's a significant concern. With little or no warning, a third-party vendor could leave the market, leaving a void in our community. Their purpose is to make money. Our purpose is to provide service. We are not a profit-making organization. We don't take 1 cent of profit out of our EMS operations. So we meet the budget each year. We're not working and we're not striving to turn a profit. With the third-party vendor, elected officials are taken out of accountability. Right now, if something happens with our EMS, I'll guarantee you the elected people are the first to be contacted to let them know that there's a problem. So because of these points, we're hesitant to jeopardize the safety in our community. But I've already asked our legal department, I've asked our purchasing department, I've asked our EMS, can you go out and get these questions answered? Because I don't have the answers. So right now, if I tell you I'm going to accept anything that you want, we'll contract immediately with a third-party vendor, I am very hesitant to do that.
So let me back up because the Vice Mayor provided, a great question. It sounds like then you're at least willing to go through the RFP process and try and qualify some to put them on a list as opposed to waiting until you get into non-compliance to the 98%. Whether you're successful or not, we don't know yet. But I would say that there is some accountability because, again, you're going to be granted the exclusive rights to manage the system. So you're still accountable. There's still some kind of accountability. Now, you may have to manage potentially a private vendor, but there's still accountability because you have exclusive rights to manage, right? Doesn't that grant you some accountability?
Sir?
Does that mean that if we do fall below 98% because our vendor can't meet the requirements, that we're going to terminate the contract then at the end of a year because we've tried everything we could do?
So not really. Again, what you guys are saying is you can either increase your owned assets. I mean, I guess the question is, how did you get from 82% to 98% in a 2-year span? You increased your assets.
Yes, we did.
So you still have that ability.
And there's still the compliance plan component of it too, to be able to meet those numbers. So there's still that opportunity to get to that 98%. Again, item 6 here still only addresses trying to reach that 98% goal and maintaining it. It doesn't do anything for those people that that are above that 98% threshold. You have no recourse to use a third-party provider, or there's no means for that for those. So all those questions that you brought up are certainly questions that you can ask as part of that RFP process. And as the provider of their service, I would hope that you would ask those. So you're right. Giving the exclusive right to operate gives you that accountability. So,
And I think some of the questions that you ask, Commissioner Dennis, are things that are already specified in your contract. They would have to meet these, qualifications. So I think your staff's already made an effort to qualify exactly what they would have to do. So a lot of that's in here. Maybe one option is if that's the question about whether or not there's somebody who could potentially meet this need, maybe there is an option where we extend our existing contract for 30 days or something to give the county an opportunity to issue an RFP to find out what the responses are and whether or not one could be selected. If for some reason we find that there is no one who is responsive, I guess, as they say, to your RFP, then that would tell us one thing. If there are more than one company and you can select someone, that would tell you we could go in a different direction. We're not unfamiliar with our counterparts changing services, which requires additional funds to be spent. Day Reporting Center is just one example. We ended up with several $100,000 as a result of that service change that the county felt it needed to make. And we feel like we need to make a change here. And that might, in fact, mean you have to spend $25,000 or something more than what you're spending now on your EMS. I guess I'm not sure that would, in my mind, make it a deal killer. And lastly, to your question about do those people get transported by the private sector, I would say they're not even included in the calculation. Your dispatch is already determined up front that that person's not, we don't have resources right now to get to somebody in an hour because it's shift change. And so you call the third-party transport, and it's not even included in the calculation. So no, it wouldn't count against you, except it would help your numbers, because then you would be picking up all the others in an hour. That would help get you to closer to 100% probably.
So the council's saying 98% performance is not good enough?
So I think we're saying 98% is the contract. What I understood the vice mayor just said is, right now, basically that 2%, and that is a great way to look at it. So that 2% doesn't impact the contract today. So if you were to utilize an outside vendor and could find one that could pick up those calls, that guarantees you that you'll stay above that 98% range if you get half of them picked up in a timely fashion. And so now you've got even more latitude to meet the 98%. So with the contract 98%, we're willing to live with.
Well, we are guaranteeing by contractual language that we will perform to 98%. And we'll
Right.
do it either by making sure we have the resources or contracting with a private
Right.
vendor.
Right. So we're on
And
the same
a private
page.
vendor that meets the standards.
Right.
And so we're promising we'll hit the 98.
I think we all agree with that.
Yeah.
The
So
question
we're-
is, what about those 50, let's just say it's 50 people a year that aren't going to get picked up?
Well, they will get picked up, and some of them in an hour and 10, some of them in an hour 20, but they will get picked up.
Right, our question is, what can we establish today with this contract that gives those people another option? Not everybody another option, just those 50 people a year.
So 98% is not good enough? I mean, we're going to pick them all up. The issue here is 98% in 1 hour a good number?
No,
The
it's not that
question,
98%
do you
isn't good
demand
enough. I said
100%
everybody
performance?
matters.
Do you demand 100% performance on all your emergency responses?
No, what we're
Well, then
saying,
you want us at 100%. Why do you not demand that your police department
contractually, you're not
respond?
being, what we're saying is that your 98% does matter, but those 50 people that don't get picked up in an hour and a half, they matter too.
Absolutely, and we
And
pick them
so
up.
we're just trying to do everything we can, and we think there's a solution to make sure everybody has a shot at getting picked up when they want. And I think that we can give people choice in the matter as well.
And
And maybe not everybody agrees with me, but everybody matters in this, and we just want to
No,
make
I
sure.
understand, but I mean, if 98% in 1 hour is a good standard, and we're going to pick the rest of them up too, we're not making them wait till tomorrow, we're going to get them picked up. I don't understand why that's not a good performance record that the city might agree with. Because I'm sure that in other agencies that you all are responsible for, you do not require 100%.
It's more about people having choice for me than it is anything else. It's more for people having a choice in a non-emergency situation. For us to say, no, you may not call who you want to transport you. We have to tell you who you have to use. If that company meets all the threshold requirements within the contract. And so for me, that's my biggest issue. It's just about people having choice in the matter in non-emergency service. You guys are performing amazing. You guys have amazing service. Nobody's going to dispute that. As a matter of fact, I think 98% is a goal that's probably too high. I mean, that is huge. So I just would love to have people that have choice. That's as simple as it comes down to for me.
And only when you know it's going to be over an hour.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have, a question for the members of the city. or maybe someone from EMS can answer this question. Out of the roughly 50 a year that aren't transported within 60 minutes, how many of them are known to be a problem at the very beginning of that call? In other words, they say, we're not going to get to you in 60 minutes. It's going to be a little bit longer than that. And we know that at the very beginning of that call versus, I think, as Commissioner O'Donnell pointed out, sometimes they may have the best of intentions to get there to say in 30 minutes, but on the way to that call, something happens and they end up getting redirected. So out of those 50, do we know what the breakdown is in terms of how many were known at the front end of that call to likely be more than an hour versus those that maybe it ended up that way because of circumstances that happened during the hour? Do we know what the breakdown is?
Commissioner Ellis, kind of again, EMS. I don't have that breakout. I don't know to quantify that today. There are circumstances that we're on the way to that transfer and then we get preempted with an emergency call and we take the emergency call and we send somebody else. They may be preempted. So sometimes from the onset, we don't know that we're not going to make it from the time they make that call because we dispatch the unit and we're sending them that way and we'll make it within an hour, but we get preempted due to an emergency call. And so those dynamics play into that. So we can't really say every time that someone calls, we know it's going to be more than an hour.
So let me just say then, obviously out of the 50, there's a combination. Some of them are of either character trait. Some of them we know we're not going to make it on the front end, and some of them we know we intend to get there, but something happens and it changes the circumstances. We end up not making the hour because of some emergent issue that's going on, and we've got to deal with those life and death calls first. And so out of the 50, it's safe to say that there's a breakdown of how that if you had the data, it would be some combination of those two things.
Right. I think we could, if we look at that and say out of the 50, and I don't know a number today, but there may be some that's very easy to identify. We're not going to be there in an hour. We've had 4 requests. We're busy in this side of town. We know we're not going to make it in an hour. We may be able to do that. Others are not that simple.
I may have a couple of other questions or comments. Let me just say, if we're going to focus on opening this up to third-party companies to do these transports because we know at the front end of the call that we're not going to make the hour, to me, that's probably not really 50, it's something less than 50. Maybe it's half that, okay? Based on the comments from Councilmember Clendenin, it sounds like he would be, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but maybe you can clarify, you'd probably rather have all of the non-emergency transports have a choice. I mean, rather than just opening this up to those 50 or 25 or whatever, you probably would like to say, if it's an emergency transport, you'd like to potentially see everyone have that choice. Would that be fair?
In a perfect world, yeah, I would like to see that. But for the sake of negotiating and getting an agreement done, I'm willing to look at the 2% and say, okay, we know that we have 2% here that are going to wait over an hour.
Okay.
That's my the biggest issue is just quality of life for even 50 citizens, and making sure that they have a choice in who and how they get home. And
I guess let me continue. We're trying to enhance our system right now. We've had plans for more stations. I think right now we've got another station on Oliver about to open. We obviously have limited resources. If for some reason there's a lot of accidents going on, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes there's a lot of things going on at one time, and the logistics are somewhat confusing to me a little bit. Someone makes a call and says, I need a transport. If we know it's going to be more than an hour, do we tell them we could get there at 2 o'clock and we're held to the standard of what we estimated we would be there, or is it held to the standard of when that call came in? I'm not really certain of that. It could be that if we know we're going to get there at a certain time, plus or minus 30 minutes or whatever it's going to be, that ought to be perhaps what we would be accountable to. If it happens to be that it's based on when calls come in, it's conceivable you might get 10 calls for non-emergency transports within a few minutes of each other, and no service, whether it be the county or the third party, could take that type of a peak load that might happen. And so I think it depends on how you calculate these response times. That's a factor. I would also like to ask, what happens if a third-party company is now part of our system of care, and also there's a surge of calls that come in, and they only accept a certain number of those calls? Is the default, it goes back to the county again? In other words, let's say you get 10 calls all at one time, and the third party takes 2 or 3 of those calls, and the remainder of those calls goes back to the county, and we can't perform because we've had this peak. I guess there's still a lot of questions on how we calculate these things, and know that if we have a third party in place and we're only willing to accept, say, 2 or 3 of those calls, do we get essentially credited for the calls we couldn't take within the 60 minutes? There's a lot of questions about how we calculate these things. I don't think the contract is really clear on these logistics. And I say that I certainly appreciate the comments from our friends across the street. I certainly agree with Commissioner Ranza on the free market side of this thing. And I agree with Councilman Clendenin that I think people should have a choice to the greatest extent possible. I also agree with Commissioner Dennis. I'm concerned about the balance of our system and Commissioner Unruh, if we upset this system of care, what are the consequences on this total system? I see both sides of this, and I don't know how to move forward, but I think the contract's done a pretty good job of trying to define large parts of this, but I don't think it's all defined. And I still have questions on how this is counted, and how we keep track of these calls, and I have concerns on both sides if we move one way or the other. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Commissioner Dennis?
Just a couple final comments, and then I'm not sure where we're going after this. But I want to address Councilman Clendenin's concerns a little bit. That I concur that we care greatly about the quality of life of every single citizen. Therefore, we've invested over $30 million just on infrastructure within the city of Wichita. That includes the buildings, the equipment, the supplies and so forth. Out of 16 stations in Sedgwick County, 10 of those are inside of the city of Wichita. We have 163 full-time staff. We have, out of that 163, 85% of them are assigned here inside of the city of Wichita. We have 12 ambulances located in those 10 facilities. We added in 2017 8 more full-time personnel. Every single ambulance has someone that's ALS qualified on that ambulance, every single one of them. We're one of only 2 ground ambulances in the state, and we are one of 180 in the entire nation of 16,000 ambulance providers that are accredited. Every one of our personnel are credentialed by the Office of the Medical Director, who receives their guidance from the Medical Society of Sedgwick County. We care deeply about those citizens. We are spending a fortune. Our budget just for personnel each year in the city of Wichita is $16 million is what we're spending for salaries just in the city of Wichita to meet that 98% that we've got now. Please don't tell me that we're not concerned about the quality of life, and every one of those matters to us.
Please don't misunderstand. My comments not at all were meant to reflect that you don't care. Absolutely not. I think you guys do care a tremendous amount, or you wouldn't have made such a lofty goal of 98%. I think the county commission and the city council of Wichita care a tremendous amount, and maybe we can arm wrestle over who cares more. But I think we all care a tremendous amount about everybody. Just because we're at an impasse about how we serve everybody doesn't mean that we don't care. And I think that we are going to get this worked out. So if I gave an impression that you guys don't care, that's not all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that those 50 people, and by the way, if we're giving people choice, I doubt very seriously that all 50 people are going to call a private party. I bet you that half of those people are going to want to stick with EMS Sedgwick County because of the very points that you mentioned on your paper there. So I just want to make sure that those people are in the 2% have choice, that's all.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councilmember Frye.
I hope no one walks away from this meeting questioning our belief in the quality of care that Sedgwick County is providing. I started off my comments today saying how impressed Mr. Meister and I both have been during this process and learning about, and again, the 98%, very lofty goal. But again, I hope no one ever questions the fact that we believe strongly in the quality of care that EMS is providing to our citizens. At the same time, I believe as electeds, our charge is to make life better for all citizens. And at this point, this contract fails to do that. It's doing it for 98%, but not the other 2%. And I think there's a way for us to improve this to allow for that, and we're not addressing it right now. One of my first comments, or one of the early comments I made, was staff had prepared an amendment for us to allow a 30-day extension of the notification so that we can continue to negotiate. I don't think we're going to get this done in the allotted time that we have today. So I'd like to motion that we adopt that extension, allow us to have more negotiation and conversation with the intent of bringing back a mutually agreeable contract for approval by both parties on August 1st or before August 1st. Because I think we're at that point. There's too many questions that have been raised that we're not going to be able to address or answer at this point.
I just want to make, perhaps this is just an editorial comment, but our goal is 100%. But there are exceptions and there are circumstances that keep you from making that goal. So in our language, I think we should say our goal is 98. That's not our goal. Our goal is 100% service. And I think that, you know, we want to do that in all of our services, and especially EMS services. And it's, I think there's a high likelihood that as we continue to invest, as we're adding a couple more EMS posts, that we'll probably improve that. Hitting a 100% goal is probably not likely. But that doesn't mean we don't care about who may not get picked up in an hour, but I guarantee you they are not in an emergency situation and they will get picked up.
So that might be a nice change in language. We could simply insert that your goal is 100%, but the contractual portion of this is left at 98%. I mean, it reflects
that's the default
everyone's
point.
desire.
That is the default point.
Right,
The
right.
98%.
Right.
But our goal is still, we could write in there, our goal is 100%, but should we
Sure.
fall below 98%, then we are in default and we have to take remedial action.
Sure.
That could be done.
So I think that would be a nice change of language. You need to word it exactly right so that it doesn't force you all to comply with 100%. We get that.
Well, if that change would advance the conversation, I'm ready to do that.
I'm not clear how that materially changes the contract.
So it doesn't. I mean, there's still, I think, a few issues to work out potentially. I'll fall back on, I kind of like the direction that the vice mayor was going in. We may be much ado about nothing if we can't find a vendor willing to meet the needs as a third-party vendor. And so would 30 days provide you enough time to try and see if there's anyone willing to step forward and potentially?
I don't think so. Yeah. It'd take probably closer to 2 months before we could run an RFP and interview them and post
Councilmember
it.
Meissner?
No, wait, one of our attorneys is saying how long, Karen?
I'm thinking 3 months before we can get an RFP and get responses back, at least 3 months.
So there, authoritatively, we said probably 3 months.
Okay, let me add a little bit of calmness to the to this here with. First of all, we first started discussing it at one time. The hour was actually 45 minutes, and we looked at data and thought, and it was presented and asked of us, can we make this an hour versus 45 minutes? And then I can't even remember how we got to the 98%, but it was, the improvement was shown from 80-something a couple years ago to mid-90s or higher today. And whatever the comfort zone was presented and offered to us, and I think we agreed to 98. So If it was 97 or 96, we might have even agreed to that. It was kind of what was proposed to us. We're not data statisticians on the performance on that level. So we've been trying to agree to most things that have been proposed through this course. I gotta counter that. I'm sorry that nobody in the county has had any discussions with any outside vendors, because a couple of years ago, I've had 3. There's a group in Kansas City that contacted me. There's a local one operating today that has contacted me. There's one in another adjoining state that I don't want to say which state that had contacted. And all 3 of them basically was a frustration in that when they try to visit with EMS or county officials, that they don't even get a meeting. So now you've also got to assume that all 3 that I talked to were credentialed to do business in the communities they were at. So we're not in the private industry is doing this all over the country, as we've said, except in our community. So I think just a phone call in 30 days to say, hey, would you guys be interested in this? Are you accredited by this or that? I don't think the CAS thing is something that privates need to be done. But I think you could probably find out yes or no. Yeah, that we can do it. And yes or no, we'd be willing to bid it. Or yes or no, maybe you have 3 different contracts with them. And let them propose what they do. And if you guys decide, hey, this meets our standards, let's get a contract. So it doesn't have to be sole source and you got one that's priced at this and that. Okay, so that is not near as challenging as it might appear to be from my perspective. And I'll be glad to get out my files and tell you which 3 companies there are that are doing it today. But based on the fact that we have limited data, I've made a lot of other phone calls with pretty valuable people in the medical community here locally and around. And the impact that, in defense of what maybe Commissioner O'Donnell said earlier or whatever, when you do have competing services in a community, at what level, if it's wide open or if it's anything over 80 or 90% or whatever, what we're talking about, it does create an environment where now there's a comparison for pricing, level of service, so to speak, response time, things like that. And if it adversely affects the government supplier, then it has had an impact on property mill levies, things like that help to support, or whatever the taxing authority is that supplies the government provided EMS, so to speak. So it does have, I recognize that. So that's why I think the small percent that we're asking to say, can that be considered to say, as the Vice Mayor said, just from day one, yeah, we've got the ball rolling. We've got offers coming in. If you want to do an RFP, I think that's okay. I'm not asking you have to do an RFP. I just think you just take a letter of offer of services that they're available, and if they don't respond in an hour or whatever, then at least we can share to the community that, look, we've done everything we can. We're trying to monitor it. The local, the county-controlled EMS is either supplying their own services, but they also have option B, which is we've made a phone call over here, and it didn't work for under an hour. And I don't think our council would be punitive or wanting to exercise a contract, to end the contract because you were in a bind and the local privates were in a bind, and we can tell a citizen, if the citizen calls the mayor's office, citizens don't usually, when they have a problem, they don't even understand oftentimes the difference between a county-owned service or whatever. It's easier to call the mayor or their council member. So I think you're asking us, you told us the terms that we've kind of agreed to most of the part. You're even asking for a long-term deal. We're asking that if we are going to give you an exclusivity at no charge, we're not charging you for this exclusivity. We're just allowing you to be exclusive for all the service. That we can't address the very small portion of a choice. So I'm not trying to add anxiety as much as I'm trying to add clarity. I think it's available. I think it's doable. And that's where I sit. And if we need 30 days to make a phone call, I would agree.
Councilmember Williams has a point to make.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I do want to also say that there's no doubt that the services that are provided by EMS right now are exemplary. I cannot say anything against those services. However, I would like to ask, Mayor, as we look at, Chair, as we look at moving forward, is it out of line to look at an RFP to allow us at least 60 days to look at that RFP? If it is going to take additional time, could the Chair and the Mayor determine if that additional 30 days is needed?
So I think Pete brings up a good point that maybe the attorneys can address. Maybe you don't even need to go out for an RFP. Maybe you just simply accumulate a list. If it's 2 companies, if it's 100 companies that meet the criteria and can be placed on a list, you just simply have a list of all of the companies operating in this area that meet the requirements of non-emergency transportation care that we've set forth. Do you even need to do an RFP?
That'd be a legal response, in my opinion. I don't know, but we could certainly compile a list. We're not breaking any law by doing that, or breaking any protocol, just to get a list, ask people who's out there.
And we may find out that there's no interest.
Might find out there's no interest.
I don't think that's the case, but based on a couple years ago, but I think they may say, hey, at this deal with minimum amount of market and the prices we'd have to do service, they might tell us that. Well, you'd have that in writing. You'd have that. They'd have that documented.
We can compile a list.
Certainly 30 days would give you enough time to see if there's even any interest out there.
Yeah. Does that have anything to do with this contract under consideration today? I mean, we're just saying we're going to do that, but does that change this language?
Yeah, I think you still have to extend the notification window at least 30 days.
So I don't know that potentially it changes this contract, other than it reassures our citizens that we have a list of people that we may call to supplement as required or as needed additional resources.
Well, I think that we can do that, and I think we have language in the contract that says that we can use them if needed, and we could even put that line in the contract that we're going to.
So I think now that we understand it, I think the council, and I'm speaking for the council now, that we're willing to grant exclusivity to Sedgwick County to provide services. What provides us even more comfort and adds just another layer of comfort for hopefully our citizens is the fact that we now may utilize a list that we accumulate to provide even more resources potentially.
Do you want that in the contract?
We'll
be happy.
So I'm seeing all of our folks nod yes. I mean, I think they would like to see that somehow written into there.
And we'll probably write in there that our goal is 100%.
So I think that sounds better.
But
we're not going to be contractually obligated to that. I mean, we'll be reasonable in terms. And Pete's right. You know, we started out at 45 minutes. We said, let's move it back up to an hour. I think the 98% figure came from you've been responding to 98% of those calls, and that's what we just latched on to.
It's a high standard.
No question. No question. So I think that the goal, I mean, our intent is to provide you exclusivity, to let you manage all of the calls.
Okay. So
go ahead, Vice Mayor.
The question is, can we move this to where we don't have to go through the process of extension? We can sign it today with those additions.
That's a question we're going to have to ask our legal staff.
I guess it's not clear to me, are there any conditions under which the county is required to use anyone off this list? Or is just the mere existence of the list all we're asked for? It's not clear to me.
This language doesn't require us to use a private vendor.
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
It does not.
That's the way I read it. And so I'm not sure what the purpose of the list is if they're not ever required to use it. And the citizen can't use it. I'm not sure what purpose.
So
Identifies a resource as the only.
So it identifies resources. The only time that they would be required to utilize it is if they don't meet the 98% goal after 6 months.
And we're not putting in our own resources. We say this is a better way to go. Because right now we have either way to.
You can do
the way
either
this is
one
written.
or both, or you might
One or
find
both.
out if there's growth, you may need to do both. I mean, again, who knows what the call volume is going to be.
Right.
I think the hangup is some of the council would like to see you utilizing that list from day one on the calls that you know are going to be. So we're getting into splitting hairs now. I mean, obviously, you respond to 100% of the calls. So 100% of the calls you respond to. There's been very rare occasions where someone's waited 2 to 3 hours. And I don't know if you recognize that they're going to wait 2.5 hours on a call from the time the call comes in. Wherever that falls, I think some of the council members are saying, if you know, let's just pick another number. If you know that they're going to sit there for 2 hours and wait on the ambulance, would you be able to call someone from the list day one, even though you're not out of compliance?
I'm sure that we could establish that protocol. I mean, we do not have it now, but we could establish that protocol.
So I think that's what the council's asking, is that protocol be established.
That was my general issue from the beginning, was just suggesting, why not have this available so that if you know you're not going to make it, you have somebody to call. That's all I ever suggested.
And that would be our staff making that call.
Right,
Not the consumer.
No, your staff making the call.
And then could I also ask what would be the length of this contract originally?
They're suggesting 5 years right now, but
Would you go to 5 years, or is there a way to go a year, 2 years to evaluate?
we can do whatever we want.
Well, this has the outage right now.
If they don't make the 98%.
then it ends with 6 months' notice.
Right.
So that's the outage.
So it's a one-year contract.
So I think,
1 year.
yeah, so sort of, if you don't meet,
Pardon me?
yeah, sort of, if you don't meet compliance, I suppose, you can look at it that way. I'm good with a long-term contract if there's some mechanism in there. If we start the list of potential vendors and we have some mechanism in there to say if we know they're gonna wait X, we'll utilize outsourced resources during that period.
Okay, then, changes that we might find agreeable is we're going to make 100% is the goal.
Right.
98% is a performance standard. We can add the language that we will compile a list of potential vendors. And then Scott said he could set a protocol to call if we see that we're not going to make it.
Right.
So if we add those 3 things, or the 4, however many things.
And
those
you guys
are,
have exclusive
then
rights
we
to
can-
manage it.
Then we can sign this without going the process of extension? I mean, can our attorneys write real fast? And
Let me hear from our attorney.
okay. Our guy's just shaking his head no.
Mr. Chairman, I think we probably ought to confer privately about it. I've got some concerns, but they may not be your concern, and you're the client. But if we're going through all of these hoops to get to the 98%, then why are we doing that if we've agreed up front just to start calling people and letting them do private transport? I don't know why that language is in there. And I don't know if this is going to be a 1-year trigger or if we're going to take the one-year trigger out if we just give them the list right up front. So I think we need to kind of think it through and talk about it, but it's up to you.
Okay, I just see that as a tool for us to make our goal. And so if I understood your comment, I don't have a concern. I may not have understood his comment, so that disclaimer.
Sounds like it might be easier to get this contract done without attorneys.
No, we can't do it.
So how we had it done by the morning. Commissioners, do you want to? We just signed an act.
Jennifer, do you want to weigh in?
I believe from the city's point of view, we are.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, do you want to try to have these changes made right quickly, and we can sign it in 30 minutes if they can have it here?
So let me hear from our attorney right quick.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I believe that from the city's point of view, we can insert these changes, the 100% goal, the 98% performance standard, and just language saying that the county will create the list. Section 7 of the draft agreement, or the existing agreement, seems to suggest already that in the event the county does subcontract with third party, it has a process by which personnel would dispatch the provider. If that's what you're talking about now, that would have that protocol.
Okay, so
I think they just want assurance that Chapter 7 will be utilized if.
you say Section 7 will.
Yeah. So just one other point, and I brought this up during the June 13th meeting. Do we really need Section 11 in there?
Section 11?
Yeah. I know it's there because it's always been there. I mean, do we really need Section 11?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think you can claim that levy.
I know we can't. So why even have a Section 11 in there?
Well, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to have it out, can we take it out?
I would love to strike Section 11.
Our attorney.
I want to hear why your attorney says Section 11 needs to be in there.
I'll let him speak for himself, because I don't know.
Well, it says in paragraph 11 that the city agrees not to make a claim on any portion of that tax levy, which means if we take this out, you can make such a claim for portions of that tax levy.
I don't think by law we can.
This would preserve a right we have by statute. Leaving that language in would preserve the city's rights that have existed in the agreement since 2004.
Can we make a claim to the county's tax levy?
Uh-oh. But you know what, Mayor? I promise not to read it if you'll promise not to read it, and problem solved.
Let me back up. Jennifer, can we make a claim to the county's tax levy?
You can now, but statutes can be changed quicker than 5-year contracts can be.
I believe this is from the state statute, and I believe that is language that is accurate. It's been in there a while, and I would need to confer, but I believe that is appropriate.
Okay.
Mayor, so I'm going to look at all those contracts we have where this clause isn't in there, where we can start claiming the county tax levy.
Well,
Mayor,
sounds like your attorney has work to do now, huh? Well, Mr. Mayor, do you think your council's agreeable to those changes if the attorneys can get them in?
Sure. Let's hear, Councilmember.
I'd like to have some discussion, but so my question is if Councilmember Fry's motion originally, if that was a motion to move for 30 days, I'd second it.
It was.
If it's still under our protocol.
All right. Under our protocol, we have a motion and a second. Let me ask my counsel, are there any other discussion on the motion?
Well, I do want to read what we're going to sign and make sure that we all agree on it. So I'm not comfortable leaving here today with a verbal, yeah, we'll sign something if it says this. If we're saying we have the legal option of recessing for some amount of time while these changes are made and we can legally reconvene and read it and sign it, I could live with that. If, you know, the other option is to just say, it sounds like we're going to accomplish this, so let's extend the deadline, and then each of us approve it at our next meeting. But that does leave open the risk of somebody wanting some more terms changed, so.
Mr. Mayor, if I may clarify, that the motion would need to be for an amendment to the existing agreement to amend Section 8 to move the notice of termination date back 30 days to August 1st. We need more than just an amendment to, or a motion to recess this item. We would need a joint agreement on the amendment that has been proposed.
And if I understand it correctly, we would also need the county to agree to that.
Correct.
So
I'm glad we're included.
well, I mean, obviously, if you don't agree to it, we fall back under last year's contract.
Or we cancel the existing contract.
So I get that.
Okay.
So
you have a motion on the floor to make Ms. Magana's motion.
That's correct.
And you have a second. And so do we need to do that right now, simultaneously make that motion?
So I don't know that we need to do it simultaneously. I am fully convinced that we will have an exclusive agreement with you all. And I think we're really, really close. I think some of them just want to be able to see the language in the contract before they sign off. So we're a little different than the federal government. We don't have to pass it to see what's in it.
I understand the historic reference.
So the question is, does somebody want to make an alternate motion to just recess this body while the changes are made and then come back?
So I don't know if that's going to give us enough time.
I think.
I don't know that 30
I
days.
think the county commission would be willing to just recess and come back and sign it. However, we're willing to yield to your desire to.
So I don't think there's.
Next day?
So I don't think there's any nefarious intent for the 30 days. We're going to get it worked out. So I would encourage us just to come back in 30 days. So let me just call for a vote. We have a motion on the floor to amend the current agreement to an August 1st notification date, if I understand that right.
Yeah,
Yes.
prior to August 1st.
Any other discussion from the council's perspective? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Do we have to call our vote?
So we have one dissenting vote, and so it passes 6-1 over here with Mr. Clendenin, Councilmember Clendenin voting nay. So I think you guys would have to make the same motion.
Yeah, we do.
Mr. Chair, I move that we make the exact same motion that the city made.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Madam, sir.
Thank you. Sooner rather than later, but do we not want to?
Yeah, we can do it any time in that 30-day window.
I just soon not end up the end of July at the same time.
Now, all we're doing is granting the contractual notification 30 days, but we can come back in
Absolutely.
3 days.
Well, I would shoot, can't we just shoot for each of us doing it at our separate meetings? Do we have to have another en banc meeting?
Yeah, I think we
I think we
can.
could do that.
Yeah, I think
Wait.
so.
Right.
But we got our next meeting on July 5th.
Sure.
Is that unreasonable?
No, not at all.
And ours would
But
be
we
the
don't
11th.
meet again till the 11th.
Okay, but we could go
But
ahead
if we
and
can
approve
kind of get
ours.
your verbal agreement or where we.
Yeah,
We can get there, yeah?
perfect, perfect.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. Any other discussion? Madam Clerk, please call a vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranza?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. Okay, we all
We're,
are in agreement with what we're doing.
we're there.
All right, so what?
Looks like we're having breakfast on Monday.
Let me say again, thank you. Thank you for coming over to our side of the street. Thank you for working your way through this, and I like the direction we're heading in. You all have been very agreeable even when we disagree, and I appreciate the sentiment.
By the way, we took the tunnel.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you, and I guess the commission will be adjourned. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Do we need the motion for adjournment, Jennifer?
I'll get a quick draft to you.
Attorney,
Yes, you need a motion.
I move that we adjourn today's meeting.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.